Must be, I'll try. All right, bonjour tout le monde, and on behalf of Fourth Space, welcome. Concordia University's Fourth Space is activated through live events daily to create engagement around the various research projects, dialogues, and initiatives happening across the university. It is therefore our pleasure to welcome in our collaborators from the Loyola Sustainability Research Center and Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability for 3 days of conversations and presentations celebrating Indigenous expertise in sustainability. This is day 2 of events, so welcome and welcome back for this session with members of Partners in Indigenous Conservational and Environmental Futures. All right, to get us started properly situated, I'll pass it over to co-director of the Loyola Sustainability Research Center, professor in the Department of Communication Studies, member of the Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability, and might I add, friend of Fourth Space, Liz Miller. Over to you, Liz, good morning.
Good morning, and my job really is to turn it right over to Monica.
Good morning, everyone. My job is to turn it over to Nafisa, who will get us started. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a panel presentation by PICEF, Partners in Indigenous Conservation and Environmental Futures. Thank you for joining us today. I would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. We recognize and are grateful to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation for their care for these lands and waters and for their teachings about the earth and our relations. Tiohtià:ke, as Montreal is known, has been a gathering place for many First Nations for millennia, and today is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. Recognizing and respecting the presence and ongoing connections of these historical and contemporary communities is an important step towards building trust and creating or renewing relationships. Our team works with Indigenous partners in Quebec, in other parts of Canada, and in Australia. We thank our partners for inviting us and welcoming us onto their territories and into their communities, and for opportunities to listen, to learn, and to work with them. We respect and are inspired by their rich knowledge and histories, their stories of resilience and survivance, and their commitment to sustainability and the stewardship of their lands and waters. We're aware that recognizing Indigenous presence on their territory is only part of the journey towards reconciliation. Through our work, may we as treaty people dedicate ourselves to moving forward in a spirit of partnership, collaboration, and reconciliation, as we learn together and seek actions that will take us towards a better future. Next slide, please. So we will start our panel presentation by telling you more about PICEF, who we are, who our partners are, and what we do together. We will also provide a scan of publications on sustainability that address Indigenous peoples and related themes and topics. We will also be sharing a selection of current projects our research group is carrying out, and we're very excited to do that. As we go through our presentation, please feel free to put your questions or comments in the chat. We will be happy to respond to them at the end, and hopefully we will have a few minutes to do so. Here's Christian Vejo, who will tell you more about PICEF.
So who we are and what we do. Those of us presenting here today are part of the research group called PICEF, which stands for Partners in Indigenous Conservation and Environmental Futures. The group is based out of the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment at Concordia. It was initiated by Dr. Monica Mulrennan, who's here on the panel with us today. and she started the group 15 years ago. And since that time, there have been about 22 students who have been a part of the group. The group of us here today, we represent both master's and PhD students, and we are all working with Indigenous partners. In the respective relationships that we have with our partners, we are constantly learning about our individual and collective positionality. We strive to be aware, to work in ethical space, and also to address socio-political dynamics. We strive to work as responsible allies. So our objective is not at all to speak on behalf of Indigenous peoples. Rather, today, we'll share our reflections on how we interpret our work and our roles as allies and community-based researchers. Our work all focuses on sustainability as defined and prioritized by our partners. You'll see when we present our personal work later at the end of the presentation that most of us work in coastal or marine areas, and most of our work is focused on land and water stewardship. Thank you, and over to Val.
Thank you, Christy. So PICEF has long-standing community partnerships with the Cree Nation of Eeyou, Istchee, in particular with the First Nation, the Cree First Nation of Wemindji and Waskaganish, also with Torres Strait Islanders in Northern Australia, in addition to a number of other partnerships with First Nations and Indigenous peoples across Canada, in Australia, and elsewhere. We also have direct involvement with other university-based research groups, including CICADA and INSTEAD, which are both based at McGill University, the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership that you'll hear about a little bit later in this presentation, FISHES, which you'll also hear about a little bit later in this presentation, and the Indigenous Futures Research Center. And finally, we'd like to share some of the main guiding principles for our work and our partnerships. So first of all, co-designed research agendas. So this means working with our partners to design research that responds to the needs of their communities and that supports Indigenous autonomy. Secondly, collaborative research methodologies. This means that our research is done in collaboration with community members and on their terms. And finally, meaningful outputs, which means that we seek to present our research outputs in ways that are culturally appropriate and also accessible to community members. These include contributions to community programs, or for example, our direct involvement in the creation of protected areas. So I'll pass it on to Cicely. Thank you.
Thank you. So although we'll be offering examples of our work later on, given the focus of this conference, we thought it'd be relevant to offer a scan of publications related to sustainability and Indigenous peoples. Next slide, please. The objective of this scan is to identify broad trends in publications that address both sustainability and Indigenous peoples, themes, and topics. And for a little bit more on that, I'm going to pass it to Leila.
To do this scoping review, we used a combination of keywords to search the Web of Science core database. Our constant keywords were Indigenous peoples and sustainability, and we selected 9 other keywords based on the different categories of both the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. These keywords include climate change, water, forest, energy, conservation, education, economy, research development, and food. So in total, we found around 1,255 articles at the date when this search was carried out. And as you can see, there's a rather even spread among the different keywords. Now I'll pass it on to Naomi.
Thank you. So before getting more into the nitty-gritty of the results, we wanted to present some of the limitations and biases that come up when doing this kind of large-scale review of the literature. So first, in terms of the characteristics and types of publications that emerge doing this kind of search, the Web of Science core collection is limited to peer-reviewed academic articles published in journals, book chapters or books, as well as conference proceedings. And this neglects any gray literature and informal knowledge that can be found outside of these contexts or that does not adhere to Western disciplinary distinctions, but may still contain relevant information. As well, the Web of Science exclusively has studies that are published in English, which might lead to a geographic bias and overemphasize research and engagement in English-speaking countries. Importantly, in this kind of broad review, it's not possible to make any kind of critical appraisal of the studies that are included. That is, there's no assessment of the nature and quality of included studies or how exactly this research has been done, which includes a lack of assessment of the extent to which these publications have engaged with topics relevant to Indigenous peoples, or the nature of how it has engaged with Indigenous peoples and knowledge systems. Despite these limitations, we're able to make some comments and identify some trends and themes within these publications that emerged, which Leila will take you through now.
Naomi. So this chart here shows the number of articles over time that address sustainability in Indigenous peoples. As you can see, the number has grown quite a bit over the past 4 or 5 years, so much so that 57% of the 1,255 articles were published between 2018 and 2021. The earliest article that appears in the core database of the Web of Science is from 1992, and it is a case of sustainable agriculture in Sri Lanka, and it was published in the Journal of Sustainable Agriculture. Next slide, please. So here we have the percentage of each of our other keywords in combination with our constant keywords, and we ran a duplication, and we saw that all of the articles that showed up were duplicated in our initial search of just Indigenous peoples and sustainability. And we have a pretty even distribution across the different keywords that we did the searches in. Next slide, please. So here we have the number of articles by discipline or subfield that address sustainability in Indigenous peoples. So according to the Web of Knowledge, Web of Science categorization, the majority of articles were published from authors with disciplinary training in environmental sciences, environmental studies, and green sustainable sciences. And then it goes down to ecology and so on. Next slide, please. So here we see the number of articles by country of primary author that address sustainability in Indigenous peoples. As you can see, the majority of these articles are published by authors, first authors from the US, Australia, and Canada. So these are the 3 settler states. That might be an interesting thing to remember. And then they're followed by China. Next slide, please. Here, this tree map shows the source of funding of studies that address sustainability in Indigenous peoples. The primary source of funding is the National Natural Science Foundation of China, and then it's followed by SSHRC in Canada, and then the National Science Foundation in the US. And now I'll hand it off to Kai to take you through more details.
So to explore some of these results, at least on a surface level, we decided to look at the evolution of recognition for Indigenous peoples and their rights within the sustainability discourse, with a specific focus on milestone international agreements. We also look at Canada briefly as an example to show how that in many countries, in particular settler states, the uptake of international sustainability commitments concerning Indigenous peoples is in tension with country-specific processes of reconciliation and with the recognition of rights for Indigenous peoples. So to look first at the sustainability agreements, this starts in 1987 with the World Commission on Environmental Development's Brundtland Report, which is often attributed as the defining document for sustainable development. And it's notably one of the first of these, or the first international document in this field that recognized Indigenous peoples and communities as holders of unique traditional knowledge and recognized that Indigenous institutions, rights, and legal orders should be respected in global efforts towards sustainable development. From then on, there have been several high-level declarations and sustainability declarations that have all considered Indigenous peoples and communities to some extent. However, the process by which that inclusion and recognition of Indigenous peoples and their rights has varied greatly. For example, the 2000 MDGs and the 2015 SDGs, Indigenous peoples are not very present. Both sets of goals have been criticized for a top-down approach, and a failure to involve Indigenous peoples generally in identifying issues and developing goals, targets, and indicators. While the SDGs did much better, according to some, to encourage that participation, they've been faulted still for lacking recognition to special circumstances of Indigenous peoples, nations, and communities. For example, out of the 17 goals of the SDGs, all of which are relevant to Indigenous communities, only 4 out of 230 indicators specifically mention Indigenous peoples. And then more recently, last year, you have the Kunming Declaration from the Convention on Biological Diversity, which it recognizes in more a fulsome way the rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities to have a full and effective participation in the context of area-based conservation, and it recommends to have traditional knowledge, practices, ways of being respected by national legislation, and Indigenous communities to have that full participation at all levels. So we ask, why are publications surging only in 2018 in the last few years, given that there's been a recognition, at least a recognition for Indigenous cultures and knowledge systems and rights in sustainability conversations since the 1980s. Well, if you look at Canada as a good example, and looking at a timeline of major milestones for the recognition of Aboriginal rights in Canada were only first recognized and affirmed in 1982 with Section 35 of the Constitution, which was not far after the Brundtland Report. But the courts continue to interpret what these rights mean well into today and will be for quite some time. And although the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which defined individual and collective rights for Indigenous peoples internationally, although it was signed in 2007, it was only implemented into Canadian legislation last year, 14 years after that original signing. So there's some reason to suggest that as sustainability commitments and the question of Indigenous rights and self-determination are taken up by state governments, a greater amount of research, interest, and capacity becomes available, mainly through public and private funding attached to those responses, which can or could indirectly translate to more research being done in this field. So that may be one explanation for the recent increase in publications, at least in Canada. And an example of that is Canada's pathway to Target 1 from 2015 in response to the Istchee targets, which led to the formation of the Indigenous Circle of Experts and the eventual 2018 We Rise Together report, which has spawned quite a bit of research focusing on the Indigenous-led conservation and its role in reaching protected area objectives globally and nationally, as well as the connections between sustainability and Indigenous peoples. So just a few take-home messages from this scan of the literature. There's been a significant rise in publications with overlapping themes of sustainability and Indigenous peoples since 2018. The highest share of those publications are seen in the conservation field. And we also wanted to finish by recognizing the leadership and agency of Indigenous peoples in sustainability efforts and research. And that while Indigenous priorities and aspirations might align with the sustainability goals of the state and the international community, they exist in their own right, and collaboration with the state is only one of many mechanisms employed in governance of their homelands. Thank you.
Thanks, Kai. Hi, I'm Monica Mulrennan, professor in the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment and director of the PICEF research group. For the second part of our presentation, we'd like to focus on a selection of projects that we're involved in. And while all of our work addresses themes and topics related to sustainability, environmental stewardship, and Indigenous community-led conservation, you'll see that our projects vary in scale and scope, from a broad global scale of analysis to projects with Indigenous partners in Australia, to work we're contributing to in relation to parks and protected areas in the Canadian context, to various projects at local community scales, particularly with the Cree Nation of Wimminji and Cree Nation of Waskaganish. And as Christy and Vero outlined earlier, our work responds to the needs and priorities of our partners as identified and overseen by them. We avail of a range of collaborative research methodologies and strive to produce outputs that are relevant and meaningful for our partners. So over to Leila for the first of the projects.
Thank you, Monica. So my name is Leila, and I'm a PhD candidate in the PICEF lab group. My research is on a global scale, and it addresses the fragmentation and disruption experienced by Indigenous peoples and local communities whose traditional territories include both land and sea. This results from a Western terrestrial bias that reduces the sea to an empty space and empty commons, and the coast to a sharp divide between marine and terrestrial realms. The Convention of the Law of the Sea, combined with the carving up of regional, national, and provincial jurisdictions, adds layers of borders and boundaries that further undermine the inherent connectedness of nature and culture at the land-sea interface. This division is endorsed by international conservation policy, including the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which we have SDG 14 and 15, which makes a division between life on land and life underwater. I've included this map of protected and conserved areas in Canada, so this one here, with the different colored polygons, and to show how protected areas tend to replicate this trend, with their boundaries often coinciding with the coastline, despite obvious and essential connections across the land-sea interface. Sadly, this phenomenon occurs in the majority of coastal and marine protected areas on a global scale, and it has profound implications for Indigenous peoples and local communities who know, use, and manage their land-sea territories as a continuum. So here we have the official map of marine protected areas, and we can see this issue happening across different countries on a global scale. So my research uses a meta-analysis of peer-reviewed publications combined with the World Protected Area Database to document this phenomenon. My work also explores options such as Indigenous-led protected areas that are available to Indigenous peoples and local communities to counter jurisdictional fragmentation and to defend and recover their land-sea connections that are integral to their territories of life. Territories of life is a concept established by the ICCA Consortium to facilitate intercultural communication and strengthen international alliances and networks of Indigenous peoples and local communities. So the ICCA Consortium is one of our partners on an international global scale. And I also work closely with CICADA to carry out this kind of research. And I am the co-author of a recent report that was published by the World Conservation Monitoring Center of the UNEP and the ICCA Consortium, which is labeled Global Spatial Analysis, the estimated extent of territories and areas conserved by Indigenous peoples and local communities. So I'll hand it off to Christy.
Thanks, Leila. So I'm Christy. I'm also a PhD candidate in the PICEF research group, and I've been working with partners from the Cree Nation of Wominji in Eeyou, Istchee, Northern Quebec for 8 years. With a group of youth from Wominji, we've been learning about our relationships with water. We've done a lot of research in and around their community. And then a group of 10 youth and I traveled to Australia, where we spent time with partners there. And we've made a 25-minute video documentary about our experiences. Here now, I'll show you about 2.5 minutes of clips. They start in Cree territory and then go to Australia.
So you pass on that knowledge and you bring people together for like a great cause, you know, like it's, like I said, water is very important to us, our livelihood.
Young people to get more involved in like studying like water, studying and research, doing research.
Today we're at the water treatment plant and we're gonna get a tour.
Doing participatory research, so research with groups. We're learning about how to better care for water by bringing together different perspectives and different knowledge systems.
Throughout the summer, we've been learning about water in and around the community, and we're here in Australia to learn about water as well.
The average rainfall is only only about 6 to 10 inches each year, and sometimes we don't get that. We have to wait for maybe another 10 or 20 years before we can get it again. When it rains here, it makes you cry.
It was very powerful to bring the Ngarrindjeri and Cree nations together. It was an important meeting and gathering to take place because it brought two nations together. We had an exchange of knowledge and skills, and even though we have this space and separated across, you know, the planet, we still had similarities and stories in common.
This is called a canoe exhibition. This is done every year annually. Back then, our elders used to use the rivers as highways.
The elders used to tell stories of coming down, paddling down the Wolfactory River from their trap line. I guess it would be in the 50s or 60s.
So there are many more stories and learnings in the full film. If you'd like to see it, you can look on YouTube for Wominji Water Wonders. And I'll now pass things over to my colleague Nafisa, who also works with partners in Wominji.
Sorry about that. Hi, I'm Nafisa. I'm also a PhD candidate. And like Christy, I work with partners from Cree Nation of Wominji and Istchee. The goal of my research project is to contribute to ongoing regional and community efforts to sustain and strengthen Cree connections to the land. More specifically, my project seeks to understand how the connections of Crees to land are evolving between generations and across genders, and to contribute insights to questions such as what opportunities and barriers exist for Crees to be on the land. How are they adapting to today's challenges of being out in the bush? What strategies should be maintained, adjusted, or developed to support Cree connections to the land? This research project has emerged in response to concerns expressed by community members and co-designed with the leadership in Wominji. This collaboration was made possible through PICEF's sustained engagement with Wominji, and various regional and community-based organizations across the USG continue to be involved in creating research outputs that meet community priorities, such as increasing youth engagement with land and culture through game development. Next slide, please. I'm very happy to share the voice of Linda Stewart, a Cree partner with whom I have worked very closely. Linda plays an integral role in Wominji's culture, heritage, and wellness programs, as well as being a knowledge keeper and an elder in training. I wanted to share a short clip of her reflection on why she is so open and welcoming of visitors, including researchers.
To learn how how Indigenous people live and how, like other people, like even you, we need to learn, we need to like every time I meet somebody like that comes in my community, I want them to feel welcome. I want them to know my culture. I want them to know my language. I want them to like know how the indigenous people like survived a long time ago, and because we need to respect each other, because when I go down south, like I expect to be treated well.
Well, thanks for listening, and I'll pass it on to Berho now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nafisa. Like Christy and Nafisa, I'm also a doctoral candidate. And my work examines the governance of Indigenous-led protected areas. More specifically, it focuses on how protected areas can support the sustainability of Cree customary land and water stewardship, of Cree ways of caring for the land and sea in a complex and dynamic institutional and jurisdictional context. So I also work with the Wamingji Cree First Nation, and I started working with community members in 2003, initially as a master's degree student, and then I continued to work with them as a PhD student. So my work is part of a larger research partnership that has evolved over time between the Wamingji community and a team of university researchers, including Monica. It's also anchored in the many individual relationships I've developed with community members and families over the years. The larger context for my research is the increasing infringement by industrial development that the Crees of EUC have been experiencing over their customary territory over the past decades, with significant negative impact on Cree customary way of life. So the problem that we address in this research is how to achieve legal protection of the land and sea from unwanted high impact industrial development, that is mining, hydro development, the building of a deep sea port, for example, while safeguarding or enhancing local stewardship. So early on in the project, the community leadership recognized that a protected area legally recognized by Quebec would offer the most immediate solution for blocking development. One of the outputs of the larger project has been the creation in 2008 of a Quebec Biodiversity Reserve, which you can see in yellow on the map there. And also the proposal in 2009 of an adjacent marine protected area, which you can see in a lighter shade there on the map. Protected areas have had a mixed history of respecting Indigenous stewardship, but new approaches are emerging, including Indigenous protected and conserved areas that Kai and Cicely will speak to in a minute. So the main question of my research then became, how can protected areas support the sustainability of Cree customary stewardship institutions in the specific context of UST? In other words, how might protected areas build upon and enhance local authority practices and understandings of what it means to take care of the land and the sea? And I'll just leave you with a few words from the late Fred Stewart, who was the tallyman of Bakumshumau. He was a guide, a teacher, and a friend. And in his view, what we should protect was the moose, the beaver, and the people that live in the area whenever they're there, and all the resources that are available to them when they are in the area out on the land. Thank you, and I'll pass it on to Naomi.
Thank you, Vera. My name is Naomi. I'm a master's student in the PICEF group, and my research is a part of the Fishes Project. Hopefully some of you here today had the chance to attend the Fishes panel yesterday, but if not, I'll just give a brief introduction to this bigger project. FISHES stands for Fostering Indigenous Small-Scale Fisheries for Health, Economy, and Food Security. The overarching goal of FISHES is to identify and address challenges and opportunities for food security and fisheries conservation and development in Indigenous communities across Northern Canada. In order to achieve this goal, FISHES is grounded in a knowledge co-evolution framework, which aims to bridge scientific genomic research with Indigenous knowledge. Critical to this is a commitment to work responsibly with Indigenous partners. So as a part of this larger project, my research is in partnership with and in response to an invitation from the Waskaganish Cree First Nation in Eeyou, Istchee. Fisheries in Waskaganish have been disrupted due to the construction of a large-scale hydroelectric project, which has diverted waters from the Rupert River and impacted key fish habitat. And there are concerns in the community about the effects this might have for consuming fish and continuing fish harvests. Research on food security tends to emphasize having access to enough food that is safe and healthy to eat. However, traditional foods such as fish are harvested, prepared, shared, and consumed with practices grounded in place-based Indigenous knowledge. As such, continued access to fisheries and the continued ability to carry out associated fishing practices contributes to more than just having an adequate, well-balanced diet, but it's culturally significant by supporting relationships with land and water, by supporting knowledge transmission across generations, and fosters community and individual well-being. I work with community partners from the Cree Trappers Association and the Eeyou Marine Region Wildlife Board, and I hope to visit Waskaganish this spring to conduct interviews with Cree women and other knowledge holders about the significance of fish, barriers to consuming fish, and strategies to improve its consumption. Unlike some other subsistence harvesting practices that tend to be dominated by men, women have a key role in preparing, processing, and sharing of fish, and offer important and distinct insights into the gender dimensions of accessing and supporting local fisheries. The objective of my research is to work with Cree women to help foreground their knowledge and expertise within the larger work of the FISHES project. And with that, I'll hand it off to Brian, who is also working on FISHES.
Hi, thanks, Naomi. Yeah, I'm Brian, and an MSc candidate and also a member of PICEF in the initial stages of my research, and really excited to get into it. And like Naomi and Monica, I'm a contributing member to the FISHES project, which Naomi gave a brief explanation of. And many of you will have had a chance to learn more about that from yesterday's panel discussion with the members from the Research Advisory Board that oversees the FISHES project research in USG. My particular contribution to FISHES involves a partnership with the Cree Trappers Association, focused on Cree community support programs which foster subsistence hunting and fishing. And some of the programs provide direct financial support, such as the Income Security Program, which provides income guarantee and benefits and other incentives for Cree people wishing to pursue harvesting activities. But other programs are less direct, which are interesting, such as support for bush camps for youth, or for example, cooking classes focusing on preparing wild foods, which are equally important in some ways, although a different relationship in terms of how they support hunting and fishing. So this research is not focused on any one community, but looks at the relationships of funding and support initiatives across USG and examines some of the commonalities and variation among multiple communities. And the work will address the question, what is the role of these programs and funding initiatives in supporting small-scale fisheries? So thanks very much for listening, and I'll pass it over to Kai.
Hello again. So my name is Kai. I'm presenting to you today from the lands of Kwanlin First Nation and Uncle John Council in Whitehorse. So the work of the PICEF coincides with the work of another university-based research body called the Conservation through Reconciliation Partnership, or the CRP. So with this presentation, I will briefly introduce the work of the CRP, speak a little bit about my own research, and the importance of collaboration in the research that I do and the research of the CRP. So the CRP is an Indigenous-led, SSHRC-supported 7-year program of work collaboratively hosted by the Isak Ulam Foundation and the Indigenous Leadership Initiative and the University of Guelph, under whose leadership structure exist a wide range of partners, including various Indigenous communities and nations, academics, researchers, as well as conservation agencies and organizations. So the CRP has 3 main goals in the work that they do. The first is to create a network for conservation through reconciliation by supporting the transition away from colonial models of conservation towards models rooted in Indigenous governance, knowledge systems, and law. And to that end, the CRP works collaboratively with partners to help establish Indigenous-led conservation projects like IPCAs, which Cicely will talk about more after this. And it also looks at the transformation of existing protected areas, such as national parks, to better align with Indigenous peoples' relationships and responsibilities to their territories. Secondly, it follows a principle of ethical and collaborative research with various Indigenous and non-Indigenous partners, and also focuses on increasing capacity and mobilizing knowledge amongst Indigenous nations, communities, and rights holders in the conservation sector. My master's research specifically focuses on the transformation of existing protected areas, and I work in collaboration with a network of Indigenous partners, as well as Parks Canada. The purpose of my research is to explore the capacity for cooperative management of national parks with Indigenous communities to support reconciliation. Many of Canada's national parks were established without appropriate consultation with Indigenous peoples. And in certain cases, this has involved forced evictions of communities from their lands on which national parks were then established. But a century later now, we are seeing Indigenous governments co-establishing national parks alongside the Canadian government. So we're talking about a massive scope across the system. And whether Parks Canada's cooperative management system with Indigenous peoples is a mechanism for reconciliation demands a deeper understanding of the grounded perspectives of Indigenous peoples and their relationships with national parks, how they view Parks Canada's reconciliation approaches, and how they themselves are strategically leveraging national parks and that legislation towards their own priorities and aspirations. This points to the importance of collaboration in research and why the CRP chooses to collaborate with a diversity of partners to identify pathways forwards and in recognition of each side's strengths. This is embodied through a practice of ethical space, which is a collaborative framework for engaging across different knowledge systems and worldviews and legal systems, which requires that all parties enter into dialogue transparently, honestly, and authentically. The ethical space is a guiding framework for the CRP as it applies to their research agenda, but it also provides a guiding light for better collaboration in equitable conservation practices in existing parks. And I will now pass it off to Cicely.
Thanks, Kai. So my name is Cicely Fox, and I'm actually one of the newest members of PICEF. I'm in my first year of pursuing a master's degree, and I'm currently developing my thesis proposal, but I haven't participated in any research activities yet, so I'm kind of excited to just share the direction I'm headed. So my work, similar to Kai's and Monica's, is in collaboration with the CRP, and thank you, Kai, for such a great outlining of what the CRP is. And so my work is to support IPC creation in Canada. And IPCA is just an umbrella term that's offered by the Indigenous Circle of Experts through their 2018 report. It's an umbrella term for Indigenous-led conservation initiatives. And the IPCA recommended these kind of initiatives as a tool to forward broad conservation and reconciliation goals. Specifically, they mentioned Canada Pathway to Target 1, but many more as well. But importantly, there's no defined pathway to implement IPCA in Canada, and each is created through unique combinations of partnerships between Indigenous leaders, Canadian government representatives, academics, NGOs, community members, etc. And IPC creation in Canada often involves partnerships between Indigenous communities and NGOs. However, there is a limited documentation on this category of partnership, and almost nothing is known in the academic literature. As well, the CRP, through its network of partners, has identified this area as of interest. So my work will contribute to the understanding of the challenges, successes, experiences, and so on of both Indigenous and NGO partners within the context of creating IPCAs. A potential partnership has already been identified by the CRP, by CRP leadership, but it still needs to be confirmed. So I'll just hold on to that. And overall, my research will address the gap in the literature, but more importantly, will contribute to practical insights and an enriched understanding of this category of partnership within IPC creation. Yeah, so that's me, and I think I'm passing it off to Monica.
Thanks, Cicely. So as a final example from our work, I'd like to share a 2.5-minute clip from a film that I've recently made with Christy's help, I should say, but this is a film with some Darnley Islander women I've worked with since the early 1990s. Darnley Island is a small island in the Torres Strait, located at the northernmost end of the Great Barrier Reef in northeastern Australia. The film draws on conversations that really capture the connections Islander women have to the sea or to salt water. And the clip I've selected to share with you is one that conveys some advice that these women have for Islander youth about how to respect and care properly for the sea and its resources.
Don't forget your island custom. You have to, that's your backbone, you know. Because I always tell them kids, you know, white man got their ways, we got our ways. Yeah, don't follow white man, because they play the city, you play the salt water, you know. That's salt water you feed you play.
They should know about the sea, the tides, the ring tides, and danger under the water, about the shark, and to know about look for the weather, and what's the danger on the reef when they walk to pick up something.
And I always tell my grandchildren when they go swimming, you know, don't destroy anything in the water or kill something that you're not gonna hit it. If you caught that fish and you don't want it, give it to somebody else that wants it.
Fishing is a good thing for you for fishing. You must understand, you must go fishing with one mind and one heart. Like when I take them kids out, come on we go, so you can learn where to fishing, how you drop your anchor. You must know how you anchor on top reef or out with sinking spot. You must know how you do them. Okay, jump in a boat, jump inside, we go out.
Do the things we ancestors did, how forefathers did, our parents did, go see, eat from the sea, live the life. Don't give it to someone else. Don't be greedy. Just catch fish, eat, give families, look after them, look after the ones we need it the most.
And our elders always tell us to respect the sea, you know, don't spoil anything on the sea. Because one day it might all go on and you're going to feel sorry that it's not there anymore. What you do for the land, we must do same for the sea. Yes. Yeah, sometimes the sea can be dangerous, but if you know what you're doing on the sea, you'll survive. And the sea will take care of you when you take care of the sea.
Okay, so that ends our presentation. I'd like to say, actually, we could move to the next slide. Great. I'd like to say miigwech and bigeso for listening. I'd really like to end by acknowledging the expertise, the agency, and the generosity of our Indigenous partners. We'd love to have had some of our partners join us today, but that wasn't possible given more pressing priorities and demands on their time. I'd also like to extend our gratitude to Rebecca and Liz and to the LSRC for the opportunity to present and for their efforts in making this conference happen this week. Thanks also to Anna and Doug for the usual wonderful support of Fourth Space. And finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the PICEF team, whose dedication and commitment to partnered work has really been a tremendous inspiration and support for my own work over many years. So I think we have a little bit of time if there are any questions, or we actually thought we'd need an extra half hour, but we've somehow managed to work very well within the time constraints. And I think we have probably a few minutes for questions if there are any. So we have one question from Sarah. So Sarah Moritz is actually the latest member of PICEF, just joining us this week, a new postdoc at the department. And Sarah has a question there that I think, Leila, maybe I'll ask you to answer. I'm just seeing. So Sarah's asking, she wants to know why Indigenous and other language resources were excluded from the scope that we gave, the overview. She didn't catch that. So Leila, if you'd like to explain how the scoping exercise works.
Sure. So there are, we didn't exclude it from the search. If you use language as another keyword in combination with our constant keywords, it results in only 62 publications from the core database of Web of Science. And we try to include combinations that resulted in over 100 articles. And also, the majority of the articles that are published with the keywords language, Indigenous peoples, and sustainability, they are duplicated in conservation and economy and the other categories. So we just chose not to use it as a separate category. Of course, it's not because we don't think it's important or it doesn't have the same value. It was just a decision to have a more even distribution of categories.
Thanks, Leila. And we have another question from Matthew. Eddie, I was asked to say grace often as a kid, which I didn't understand then. As time goes by, I catch myself thanking everything that I eat for giving itself to me. My question is, how do you communicate your good intentions to the fish when it is sacrificing its life? Just wondering if anyone wanted to come in on that. Well, I can, just from my own sense of working as part of the fishes and some of the interviews we're conducting, the understanding, and I don't know if Nicholas Renaud is with us. He gave us such a beautiful account of the relationship and the respect for fish and how central that is to the relationship. But certainly the understanding I have, just based on some of the conversations I've had with Cree in particular, is that the fish understand and indeed, really only make themselves available to people who are respectful, that there's a communication and an understanding that the fish in offering itself, making itself available to, the gift to give itself up, it does that in response to its recognition that you're acting in a good way, you've got a good heart, and so it's not just the thanking, the gratitude at the end of, just as you're consuming, it's part of the whole process, that the respect is at every stage. So I don't know if anyone wanted to add anything to that from the PICEF group.
I'm not part of the PICEF group, but maybe, and it's not directly related to fish, but I think with every animal or every plant, even that either the Crees or I work also with the Eeyoos, I think you're right, Monica. It's all the little actions you make, if you follow the right way of fishing, of hunting, of collecting. If sometimes it's certain colors you need to wear, or certain gear you should or shouldn't use, or just in how you process it too, how you process the food, the animals is all part of the respectful relationship and of thanking the animals and the plants that offer themselves. So yeah.
It makes me think of, I guess it's sort of a cognitive shift from thinking individually, as in like, I am a human killing a fish to eat, to thinking more collectively, thinking of energy exchange, where instead of thinking about killing something, it can be thought of lifing something, so that energy is going to transform from one physical form to another and just sort of work its way through the greater collective of physical beings, so that it's not so much as like an individual killing another individual, but rather this collective life force that just keeps flowing. So then maybe there isn't even a need to say thank you, but it's more this gratitude of understanding the overall collective. I don't know if that makes sense, but sort of thinking about it differently. So instead of, like, in an article I read, it talked about not killing animals, but lifing animals, in the sense that their life energy will continue on, just in a different form.
Thanks, Christy. And as Carter has in his comment, this is very different from commercial fisheries out east, indeed, a very different relationship. I think Rebecca's asking if we can turn on, if the PICEF group can turn on their cameras. Great. And Rebecca, at this point, I see it's 3 minutes to 11. Maybe we should hand over to you. I gather you have some announcements to make.
Yes, thank you so much, Monica. It was really, really wonderful to hear about all of the work that's going on in your lab group. Wonderful to hear from all of the panelists today. Thank you so much for sharing. We will, if anybody wants to stick around and has time to stick around, we can continue the conversation in this main room and also in breakout rooms. The reason that we're doing this conference today as a meeting instead of webinars is so that we can have those casual conversations, which are sometimes some of the best parts of conferences, even though we're still online. So I invite our panelists to stick around if you have time. there's certainly no obligation. And also our audience members, if you'd like to stick around, it would be wonderful to have you. We are continuing today with our synchronous events live streamed at 2 o'clock with Danica Billy Littlechild, who is a legal expert and scholar extraordinaire. We are really honored and excited to have her coming as our keynote today. So I hope that you will come back then. We also have a really wonderful lineup of presentations that have been pre-recorded as part of our asynchronous session, and also 2 films that have been, well, 3 films actually, 2 of which have been put together by Nicolas Renaud, who spoke yesterday morning about the Wendat fishing, and well, he spoke about Wendat fishing. His films are not about fishing. The films are A Brave New River and I Dream in Innu. They're both beautiful. The I Dream in Innu is a short film, and Brave New River is a full-length documentary. If you have a chance, especially to watch the Brave New River film, please do so because it is only available for a very limited time through our website. Normally you would have to pay to get it, but Nicolas has kindly, graciously submitted it to the conference. We were really hoping to be able to live stream it so that we could have a screening, but the live streaming doesn't work so well over Zoom. So we invite you to please check it out while it is available on the conference website during this break between synchronous events. And I will put the link up to the conference webpage there. The recordings, thank you. The recordings for all of the events that took place yesterday, including Nicolas' presentation first thing in the morning, which was referred to here, is available. They are available on the conference website as well. So you can check those out during the break too. And I have also one final thing to plug before I say some final thank yous, which is that we also have, not as part of the conference, but as something else of interest to our LSRC members around sustainability, is we have Robert Sanford, who's the Global Water Futures Chair in Water and Climate Security at the UN, speaking today at 1 o'clock. So I'll just put the link in. This will not be at the conference as part of the conference, so it's not hosted through the conference, and it's not part of the conference website, but it is scheduled so that people will have time to check that out and then get back here for Danica Billy Littlechild. So please check that out if you have time, but also do check out the conference website and all of the exciting things that are planned for the rest of today, and also for tomorrow. We have the Youth Network Chair hosting a delegation of youth from Kagnawake who went to COP26, who are going to talk about climate justice, Indigenous perspectives on climate justice, which will be really exciting. We have Andrea Reid coming tomorrow late afternoon, 4 to 5, to close our conference to talk about two-eyed seeing and fisheries management. So we hope that you will come back, and more events tomorrow afternoon as well. And with that, I would like to thank once again Monica for organizing this panel, all of the panelists. This was an amazing feat, really beautifully choreographed, impressive sequence of flow, of the logic of really amazing. It was super easy for me and Liz here in the background, and for Anna and Doug to just sit back and let you take it away. And it's really great to catch up on all of the exciting things that are going on with your research. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for the work that you do. And thank you to our audience members for coming for this first session. And we hope that you'll stick around and come back as well.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. What we'll do now, as Rebecca suggested, is we will cut the live stream until 2 p.m., but we will be playing those videos that students have recorded for you in the Zoom space, those of you who want to stick around and watch them here. Again, if you want to just have a private chat with somebody, that's what the casual chat rooms are there for. So feel free to direct chat with a friend and go in there if you want to continue the conversation. Otherwise, in this space, we'll be playing those videos now, and we'll see you back at 2 p.m. Thanks, everybody. Congrats again to the team. Really smooth and wonderful presentation. We really enjoyed it. Thank you.